Thank you. Our next speaker is Andreas Ytterstad from the Norwegian campaign for 100,000 climate jobs. Andreas.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. I'm also very honored to be here. I'm also on the board of what's called Concerned Scientists Norway. So I'm a climate scientist studying the media to begin with. This book that I'm going to talk about is, which I'm the main author of, is really a collective project. It's called precisely 100,000 Climate Jobs and Green Workplaces Now. It looks like this. I'll send out a couple of copies. I should have brought more, but you can have a feel for it. It's in Norwegian, except for the foreword by James Hansen. But you'll have a look and you'll have a feel, and you can just have a look inside the flap, and you see that there's loads of organizations behind it. At the core of this project is a collaboration between scientists and committed trade unionists. And the two forewords reflect this. The first foreword is by Jan Davidsen, who's leader of the biggest single union in Norway with 330,000 members, the Norwegian Union of Municipal and General Employees. And he writes the following in the foreword, that Norway needs to make the move to green workplaces. It needs to have a controlled scaling down of its oil and gas export now rather than later. We can't wait for the market to make the decision. We have to make it now. We have to make the decision. The second foreword is by James Hansen, and that is in English, so there will be no need for translation on this one. And what it says, as I'll go on to show, is actually, you know, it may appear obvious to you, but in a Norwegian context, this is a very radical thing to say. There can be no Norwegian exception to this truth. Clean energy must replace fossil fuels. I'll show you in a minute. But let me, before I go into detail, just give you a little bit of feel for the process behind this book, because it's just as interesting as the book itself. And also what I'll call the elephant in the room of Norwegian climate politics. My inspiration for this came from South Africa. I was at the dismal COP in Durban in 2011. Very distressing as such summits are, except for the launching of this campaign on 1 million climate jobs. Now, I knew about the idea from beforehand. I've been inspired by the campaign that's been going on in Britain for various years. But it was there in South Africa when I saw people fighting against privatization of water, unemployed people, connecting their struggle for the here and now, for their very existence with the salvation of the planet, that I had a feeling that the idea might be a real mobilizing force. And it inspired me, so when I came back to Norway after the summit, I hooked up, or I became part of a very broad alliance that is now developing very rapidly in Norway, called the Climate Election 2013. Framtida velges nå means the future is elected now. It was a brilliant initiative taken by the grandparents' action against climate change 2 years before the general election, saying that if we're going to make the last generation of politicians able to actually do something, move when they want, we have to start a campaign now, 2 years before the general election. So I became part of that coalition, and that coalition now has 70 organizations involved. The churches, the Peasants Association, some trade unions, but trade unions, would you believe it, are sometimes slow. So I think that it's not only in the coming week that some of the big unions will officially join this alliance. Nevertheless, because of the jobs aspect, they joined up with the book. So 2 national trade unions have financed the book, and they focused on the book, and this is a separate campaign developing out of this broader people-based campaign that is focusing on the union specifically. And it is which I'll talk about in continuation. I need to give you just one word about Norwegian climate politics. It's important, I mean, you know about Norway as this benevolent country and so on. But it's important to know what is official Norwegian climate change policy. They have invented a word called unilateral common implantation. Does it sound absurd to you? Well, that's because it is absurd. But it's nonetheless the official policy. What does it mean? It means that the Norwegian government, and this is a consensus position, Norwegian oil and gas is produced more environmentally friendly, more sustainable than any other oil and gas in the world. This argument even applies for the tar sands in Canada. It's better that Statoil makes the deal than British Petroleum because we're slightly better. And this means that although no other country recognizes the right of Norway to do so, Norway continues to credit itself with its oil and gas export as a climate policy in itself. No, I know it's laughable, but it's true. It's official documents, and this is a quote from the PhD, most important PhD written about this stuff in Norway. So it is really confronted with this basic idea that I and many other people have felt over the last few years, like Jack Nicholson, after he makes out with Helen Hunt in that Oscar-winning movie As Good As It Gets, and here read As Good As It Gets as official climate change policy. After making out for the first time, he groans and he says, I know I can do better than that. And this is really the feeling that many people in Norway are experiencing now. We must mention the oil, we must mention the gas, we must move for climate policies that goes against the grain of the consensus. So, to create climate jobs in Norway is different from South Africa. It's different from here. Partly because of the oil economy means that employment is very low. So to create jobs, you at the same time have to shift jobs. You have to shift jobs from the oil industry and from the people working at the oil rigs to produce windmills outside the North Sea. You have to shift people from airplanes to public transport and so on. So the campaign in Norway immediately turns very ideological. Fortunately, we have help in doing so. What's been amazing about this book is the support that it got. It is supported by 3 national unions, paid by the unions. All the democratic environmental organizations is behind the book. And, amazingly, the Norwegian church. At our launch of the book, the Norwegian Church Council had a video link just making its resolution saying that we are for the reduction of Norwegian oil, the ethical thing. And they saluted the unions for their initiative on new jobs. And the unions saluted the church for their bold initiative saying that we need to reduce oil. And this led to some really, really fantastic media coverage, although I'll come back in a minute. That media wasn't what we aimed for. But nevertheless, this is the main left-wing party paper in Norway. And what says "Går sammen I klimakamp" is the unions and the Norwegian church joins in climate battle. That is the headline of it. It was repaid afterwards, but this is Vårt Land, which is the main Christian paper in Norway. And here it's 2 trade unionists saying, we are going for a climate battle on the TUC Congress. Now I won't say that these 2 trade unionists that you see in the picture appear in the Christian paper because of the book and because of the campaign. I won't say it, but I think it's so. I think it's so. I think it's a product of an idea that was very much ripe and it's developing. And this has been the amazing thing about the book. We didn't aim for media. We spread this book through 60 civil society organizations throughout Norway. My personal favorite is the Norwegian Priest Association, who ordered 110 books. Now, I'm not a religious man, but the idea that there are priests in Norway preaching the gospel of climate jobs it sometimes makes me sleep very well at night. By the way, you can have a look at the website afterwards if you want to have a feel for it. And what we also did was to have some coverage in the trade union press. This is yours truly, in one of the first editions. And the story here, this is the journalist writing, "The politicians fell asleep, the climate debate evaporated in the petroleum fog. Now the trade union movement and the churches are mobilizing for a climate solution from below." And that kind of messages seep through some of the trade union press. It's so inspiring. I mean, how often do we not feel, Manuel was talking about having the good ideas, but what is more inspiring than when you have ideas and you never met the people transmitting your ideas, but then you see someone like this, who's a deputy leader of the LO TUC in Oslo, who spoke at the TU Congress just a month ago, quoting from the book, saying there will be no jobs on a dead planet. I never met her, but we're going to work together in the coming week. And this sort of invisible spread of an idea has been so inspiring. This is just my personal favorite. This is a very local paper. And one of the grandparents, who written it just 3 days ago on the World's Environmental Day, the 5th of June. And she says this: "The burning of oil, gas and coal poisons our planet. All the explaining away that we have the cleanest oil won't change that. Simple justice demands that we stop the poisoning. Let us build a bridge," and she refers you to the Climate Jobs campaign in the book, "and let us cross it. Many of us, everybody will benefit. We, nature, people across the world, those that come after us." So the idea has spread. But for all inspiration, and I'm really inspired, as you can tell, by what's happening, it's not a campaign yet. It's a very, very good idea with very, very broad support. I look forward to discuss both you here in the plenary and later on how to take this further and so on. Just let me mention a few things. There's a sequel to the book, How to Phase Out Norwegian Oil. Amazingly, I don't believe it, it's sent to press. It's written by somebody else here in the audience. My fellow Helge Rygvik is writing the next book for the campaign here. And we're all aiming for the 24th of August. There's national demonstration just before the general election by the 70 organizations. That will be one important date. It will show whether we can accumulate the critical mass of people that demonstrates that climate politics from below is a real possibility. That is the thing we want to do. The last thing I'll say is that at our launch, which I think is an exciting idea, there were students in renewable energy. In Norway, there are a lot of competence. People want to shift Norway. But every single competence is sucked up by the oil industry. If we can make them move, and they're already planning a meeting by the end of June now, planning for the semester. We think that after the general election, there's a real possibility that that will have the combined dynamics of students and workers and environmentalists and churches fighting for climate jobs and green workplaces as the bridge to a different Norway and the bridge to a different planet. Thanks a lot for listening to me.
Can we put Laura on live now? Richard, Jack? This will be Laura Skinner from the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. Laura is based in the United States, but Trade Unions for Energy Democracy is now an alliance